When the final season of Amphibia ended in May 2022, I was an emotional mess. Same with everyone else in the community. The story that began in June 2019, before the pandemic, which goes to show how long ago that was, wrapped up in a bittersweet but still well-deserved finale, and I really thought we won't get to see any more content relating to the show afterwards. Thankfully, I was wrong about that, and we got Marcy's journal. After 6 months of waiting, and then another month of waiting because of delays, I and hopefully most of you guys got the book and read it. Keep in mind, I only have the ebook and paperback copies of Marcy's journal, so whatever exclusive content there is on the hardcover, I can't comment on that just yet as I am currently out of the United States for vacation and unable to get the hardcover shipped to where I am. But after reading the book twice now, I can confidently say that I really enjoyed reading the book. Granted, I do like reading when I'm not forced to do it at least. Also, it's about Amphibia, so saying that I enjoyed it is not surprising. However, I still want to go in depth with my opinions on the book because we do learn quite a lot about Amphibia and the main characters of the show, and it actually changed my opinion on the show itself much more than I expected. So if you haven't read the book or have not completed it yet, I suggest you finish reading it first because there will be spoilers. So like I said, I really enjoyed the book so much. Nearly everything about it was excellent, from the aesthetics of the cover, to the artwork on the pages, to of course, the stories and journal entries that Marcy and Anne wrote in the book. Pretty much all of the entries in the journal did a great job showing us what happened to Marcy and Anne from a different perspective, giving us insight on how they are that the main show could not. The first 51 entries in the journal showed us what happened to Marcy during Amphibia Season 1, and I'm really glad we finally saw her story during this time in the show's timeline. It's basically a much longer version of Marcy's theme song Takeover, but in graphic novel form. As a result, we see what happened to Marcy in rather great detail. In fact, Marcy's entries in the journal, especially during these first 51 entries, felt less like reading a book page and more of actually watching an episode or a Disney short, largely due to the illustrations and the fact that Marcy was writing those earlier entries in real time as the adventure was happening. So the vibe you get from reading these entries are very well reflected with the emotions that she experienced at that moment. In these entries, we get to see Marcy's side quest adventures, like taking out a giant golden crab to become part of the Utopian Night Guard, meeting and befriending her cadets, Javi, Kettle, and Femur, taking out the creepy cult, meeting General Yunnan, confronting her cadets' former leader, meeting Joe Sparrow, and all the fun she had in between. I would like to talk about those earlier entries in further detail, but I'll have to save those for later videos because I don't want to make this video too long. But to wrap up my thoughts on the earlier entries, it's also really nice to see Marcy's more emotional side and see her develop her friendship with King Andreas, as it retroactively makes her goodbye to him at the end of the series just feel ever so more impactful. Also, it's great to note that Marcy definitely felt really guilty about hiding her secret from Anne and Sasha and was really worried for them. It just goes to show that you can still have fun and enjoy yourself, but still have very strong underlying fears lurking behind you. Overall, the first 51 entries of the journal were probably my favorite portion of the book, as it gives us the most new information on Marcy and the lore of the show compared to the rest of the book. That leads me to the next portion of the journal, which covers Amphibia Season 2 from her perspective. Since Marcy was present for most of the episodes in Season 2, we don't really learn that much new information on her, or Anne, or the planters, or the lore of the show. But we still got interesting insight to what she was thinking and feeling during this time of the show's story. We got to see what Marcy thought of the rift between Anne and Sasha, her true feelings of seeing Anne going with the planters at the end of A Day at the Aquarium, her thoughts on Andres' plan with the Calamity Box, how she felt during the Temple Trial episodes, and her thoughts on the events at the end of Season 2. Again, these entries are likely worth their own videos, but they're for another time. Overall, this section of the book was the least interesting part, which is why I don't really have much to say about it, but it's still good to read this portion, especially after seeing what Marcy wrote on her last entry before, well...
Marcy, hurry! I just need to...
Now look what you've made me do.
I'm sorry for everything. Marcy!
The next part of the book goes over the first half of Season 3 and Anne's entries into the journal. Despite the journal covering most of what we already saw in the show itself, we still got a good amount of new interesting insight to Anne's perspective, specifically regarding her underlying feelings during this season. Even though the show itself covered Anne's adventures with her family in a more fun, lighthearted tone, Anne's actual feelings were much darker and more serious. In reality, she felt really guilty and depressed during Season 3A, and it rather recontextualizes a lot of the decisions Anne made throughout the show, like why she was so hellbent on trying to get back to Amphibia and protect the planters. I get that through context clues, you should be able to see Anne's underlying motives, but it's nice to finally see confirmation on this rather than relying on mostly speculation. I'm almost willing to say that it makes up for the lack of the serious dark tone in the first half of season 3. Emphasis on almost though, and I'll explain why in a moment. Overall, I really enjoyed reading this section and seeing Anne's more serious thoughts and feelings during what is supposed to be a fun time for her. Also, we got new details on Anne that we did not see in the show, like her confession to her parents, how she met Marcy, and her thoughts on Sasha and how her family is the key reason for her manipulative behavior towards Anne and Marcy. Speaking of Sasha, we got to see more of her and Anne's interactions with her, few of which we did not actually see in the show. The main one being that Anne and Sasha did actually have a day of rest and relaxation, even during a time of war. That kind of interaction is what I wanted to see more from Sasha during season 3, which is one of my criticisms for how she was written. While it would have been better to see it in the show itself, at least we did get to see it in the book. Aside from that, however, there's not a lot for me to talk about regarding Anne's entries during the war story arc. Since season 3B was more serious and covered the lore and character development more thoroughly anyway, there wasn't much that the book can add to this. That leads me to the final section of the book, which is Marcy's last journal entries after she got Joe back. Similar to Marcy's first entries, her last entries covers information that was unable to be shown during the series finale of Amphibia. And like those first entries, they're worth discussing more in later videos. But here's my initial thoughts on them. It's great to know that Marcy was able to spend more time with Anne and Sasha before she moves with her parents. Apparently, even though Marcy seemed physically fine to us in The Hardest Thing, she did end up going to a hospital and seeing a therapist, which is something that I think Anne and Sasha should have done too, assuming they didn't. I mean, Marcy has gone through a lot, and so have her friends. Also, it seems like that the mere existence of the Calamity Stones are needed just to open a portal, let alone open one big enough to walk through. Marcy's goodbye with Anne and Sasha was the most emotional part of this book, as it should. Finally, why does Marcy's very last entry have to be a cliffhanger? On one hand, it's great to know that we are likely to see more stories relating to the Calamity Trio in the future in some form, but at the same time, it does not help with solving the Amphibia brain rot I've been having since the series finale. This show will forever occupy my mind, won't it? Overall, Marcy's Journal is an excellent book to read and does a really good job acting as an extension to the main story of Amphibia, with the great visuals, rather great humor, and new information on the characters and lore of the show. With that being said though, I cannot help but feel how this book made the main show better and worse for me. Now, what do I mean by that? On one hand, the book did make the show better because of the new information we see, but on the other hand, you can make the argument that most of the information we see in the book should have been in the show itself anyway. Granted, for the first 50 entries and Marcy's last entries, it makes sense for them to appear only in the book or maybe in cartoon shorts like the Vlogs from the Bog series of Amphibia shorts. Most of Marcy's adventures in the beginning and the end of the book are too big to incorporate into the 3 seasons of Amphibia we had. But with details like Anne's hidden emotions during season 3, those should have been in the show itself, because it is not a good form of storytelling to rely on separate media to get information like that. I get that in a previous video I did downplay that criticism of season 3, and I still stand by my opinion that it's not a big problem. But it is still a criticism that I agree with. People should not have to buy a book just to get information that the show should have provided. I know it's not completely the writer's fault for this disconnect, and Disney is largely to blame for that, but understanding the why does not excuse the problem. My point is that the book made me realize that Amphibia, the show itself, is not as incredible as I thought it was when I watched it at first. Don't get me wrong, I still love the show for what it is, but I can see more of the flaws of the show more clearly now because of the book making up for its downfalls. With that in mind though, none of the things I just said are anything critical of the book itself, which just goes to show how good it is. So yeah, I really enjoyed reading Marcy's journal and learning more about my 2 favorite characters from my favorite show. If you made it to this point in the video, that likely means you read the whole book already. In that case, leave a comment below on your thoughts on Marcy's journal and consider giving the thumbs up for this video and subscribe to the channel. Anyways, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. I hope you all have a great day. See you in the next one.